Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's debate. My name is Ryan and I'm the chairman, and Clayton is the timekeeper. This debate will be judged by a panel of 3 adjudicators, who are Mr. Aidman, Miss Bragg and Mr. Wood. The topic of this debate is that homeschool is a quiet rebellion against traditional education. The affirmative team, seated to my right, is from Nazareth Catholic College. The negative team, seated to my left, is from Trinity College. The speaking time for this debate is 4 minutes, with a double bell at the end of your speaking time. A warning bell will ring once at 3 minutes. A continuous bell will ring 30 seconds after the final bell. Please switch off your mobile phones and other electronic devices. I declare this debate open. I call upon the first affirmative speaker, Bailey.
Good evening, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that homeschooling is a quiet rebellion against traditional education. We define the topic as homeschool from Oxford Dictionary, educating one's child at home instead of sending them to a school. Rebellion from Cambridge Dictionary, action against those in authority, against the rules, or against normal and accepted ways of behaving. Therefore, a quiet rebellion does it in a way that it does not explicitly advertise this defiance. Traditional education, attending a school in person with lessons led by a classroom teacher. We, as the affirmative team, strongly believe that this statement is undoubtedly true. Today, I'll be discussing 2 points. Firstly, how homeschooling rebels against standardised learning and testing. Secondly, how homeschooling puts parents back in control of their educational spending. Our second speaker will be talking to you about the limitations of location and time. He'll also be talking to you about the pressures of meeting cultural expectations. And finally, our third speaker will rebut some of our team's case. Tonight, I look forward to presenting 2 key topics. My first key point is that homeschooling quietly challenges traditional education by giving parents the freedom to balance focused study sessions with brain breaks and assess progress through adaptable testing methods. Traditional education treats all students as if they learn the same way. Homeschooling quietly challenges that by giving families the freedom to manipulate education to their child's individual pace and style. According to a trusted helpline, Brain Balance, the average attention span of a 14-year-old is about 45 to 35 minutes. Yet in traditional schools, students are expected to focus nearly 6 hours a day with only a few breaks, regardless of how their brains actually work. Homeschooling rejects this unrealistic model by allowing breaks, movement, and flexibility, a quiet refusal to conform to rigid classroom structures. It also pushes against standardised testing. Homeschooling programs like UCA notes that national assessments like NAPLAN aren't required for homeschool students. According to University of Melbourne, teachers reported that 90% of students felt stressed or overwhelmed just before NAPLAN. Furthermore, students are subjected to these stressful tests despite evidence that they have very limited benefits in determining how a child is learning. This provides all the more reasons for parents to rebel against the unproductive tests and put their child's well-being first. My second point is that homeschooling rebels against the cost of traditional schooling by reducing the financial impact on families. Traditional education is heavily tied to public funding, expensive uniforms, and rigid school zoning. When families choose homeschooling, they quietly step out of this part of the economy. In 2025, the government spent an estimated $31.1 billion on education across all sectors. Instead of contributing to an education system where there is no say how their money is spent or divided, homeschooling families redirect their money towards specialised resources for their child. How has the uniform you wear directly impacted how well you learn? We, the affirmative team, have calculated how much it would cost for a full school uniform from major uniform supplier Devon Clothing. This came to an eye-watering price of $1,081. Wouldn't that $1,081 be much better spent on school supplies or learning experiences? When families choose to homeschool, they not only gain a choice of what they wear, but also what they spend their money on. On top of this, data published from 9 News shows the average amount of money spent for a child's whole learning career at a private school was $316,000. When families don't have the money to choose a private school, they have no choice but to be allocated to a public school based on where they live. By homeschooling, families regain a choice and rebel against the idea of where you live determining where you learn. In conclusion, homeschooling quietly rebels against traditional schooling by rejecting one-size-fits-all education and redefines how money and structure in education are approached. It's not a loud protest, it's a subtle, deliberate choice to step outside of the system. Thank you.
I call upon the first negative speaker, Seth.
Good afternoon, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that homeschooling is a quiet rebellion against traditional education. We partially agree with the definition of the affirmative team. However, the first affirmative speaker has not defined rebellion correctly. The first affirmative team defines rebellion too loosely. By our definition, a silent rebellion is quiet, making very little noise, and a rebellion acting against authority, rules, or accepted norms. Real examples, like Rosa Parks, who quietly refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus, involved real risk and directly challenged unjust laws. Homeschooling in Australia, however, is legal, regulated, and supported by the government. It works within the system, not against it. Homeschooling is simply a choice and way of learning, not a rebellion. Overall, we define the topic as being able to teach a child at home rather than sending them to a physical school, being an action against authority, done with the intent to overpower, being done in a way with very little noise. However, we the negative team believe that this statement is false. Anyway, today as first speaker, I'll be talking to you about how homeschooling is not an attempt to overthrow traditional schooling, therefore it is not a rebellion. Additionally, the constant changes found inside of education, proving that homeschooling is merely a different form of teaching. Our second speaker will continue our reasoning by explaining how homeschooling is not a silent rebellion against homeschooling, but rather one of education's many forms, as well as how homeschooling is simply a better solution for families, depending on various factors. Our third speaker will rebut and sum up our team case. Today I'll be discussing 2 points. Firstly, homeschooling is not an attempt to overthrow traditional schooling, therefore it is not a rebellion. As education expert Pat Ferenga explains, homeschooling should be seen as an intentional and positive choice rather than a radical movement. Similarly, thinking and educating notes that homeschooling appears less like a rebellion and more like a reasonable alternative. Often blended with extracurricular activities and community programs, if we look at history, real quiet rebellions in education include the student sit-ins of the civil rights movement, where young people risk expulsion and violence simply by sitting in segregated spaces, or the underground school in Nazi-occupied Poland and Taliban-era Afghanistan, where students risk their lives to keep learning. By contrast, homeschooling in Australia is government-approved, regulated, and integrated with community programs. Unlike those acts of defiance, it does not resist authority, but works within the education system. Homeschooling is therefore a choice, not a rebellion. It's a valid and regulated pathway that strengthens rather than undermines education. Now to my second point. Education is inherently dynamic, and homeschooling represents evolution rather than rebellion. Throughout history, educational practices have continuously transformed. The introduction of laptops into classrooms in 1989 revolutionized learning, giving students access to vast information and digital tools. Likewise, the rise of online learning platforms has expanded opportunities beyond traditional classrooms. While often met with initial resistance, these innovations have become integral parts of modern education, showing that change in education is adaptation, not rebellion. Dr. Naomi Fisher, a clinical psychologist specializing in autism and trauma, argues the perception of schooling as a sole legitimate form of education is a relatively recent development. Homeschooling offers a personalized approach that can better cater to individual learning needs, fostering autonomy and intrinsic motivation in students. This perspective challenges the notion that traditional schooling is the only valid educational pathway. So rather than thinking of homeschooling as an intruder or something completely adverse to traditional education, we truly need to be acknowledging that homeschooling isn't a rebellion, it's simply the growth of education. The world is growing every day with new creations and discoveries, but so is teaching, with its new addition being the format of homeschooling. So Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we, the negative team, firmly believe that homeschooling is not a rebellion. Education is constantly evolving, and home-based learning is one of its many adaptations designed to meet the diverse needs of students. Thank you.
I call upon the second affirmative speaker, Austin.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's debate is that homeschooling is a quiet rebellion against traditional education. We, the affirmative team, believe that this statement is true. The first speaker from the negative team has tried to tell you that homeschooling is a personal lifestyle choice, not a rebellion. This is wrong because, referring to our definition, a rebellion is acting against normal or accepted ways. That means that it doesn't have to be loud or deliberate. By withdrawing from the system, families still choose a side, weakening the dominance of traditional education. A Queensland government report found homeschooling rates grow fastest when dissatisfaction is highest. The pattern itself is a rebellion. He also said that homeschooling is an evolved form of traditional education. This is wrong because every time a schooler steps away from traditional education, it is one less enrollment in the traditional system, quietly resisting its global reach. These families aren't attacking institutions, they're opting out, building parallel models that reshape how education is understood. The rebellion is subtle, but the impact is unmistakable. Our first speaker has already explained that homeschooling quietly rebels against the standardized testing and traditional practices, as well as talking about how homeschooling rebels against the cost of traditional education. Tonight I will be talking to you about 2 points. My first point is that homeschooling rebels against school being set at a fixed location and at a fixed time. Homeschooling challenges the status quo by providing the opportunity to learn at any time in any place. This flexibility is especially appealing to families who want to live a lifestyle where travel and life experiences are put first. Parents still want a great education for their children, but also want to live life to its fullest, not putting off the lap around Australia until the kids have grown up. By choosing the flexibility of homeschooling, they rebel against the unfortunate grounded norm. Beyond location, peer-reviewed research conducted by the New York University and published by Oxford University Press shows that adolescents learn better at different times throughout the day depending on factors in their personal lives. The research states that some sleep-restricted adolescents exhibit poorer cognitive performance in the early morning and in the afternoon due to fatigue, both when they are expected to be retaining information in their classes. This contradiction shows that ideal learning time is deeply personal. There has been little action from traditional schools to address this research. The rebellion represents a deep care about how new educational research that is seen as either controversial or too hard to implement in traditional settings. My second point, that homeschooling rebels against the rigid cultural expectations of traditional schooling. Traditional schools aim to educate students not only in academic curriculum areas, but also in ethical ways to act. This assumes that parents agree to the ethos of the cultural values of the school. For example, a 2019 survey by the National Home of Education Research Institute revealed that over 16.3% of homeschooling families identified to provide religious or moral instruction as a key reason for homeschooling. This highlights how families are willing to rebel against traditional education to further their own beliefs, teachings and customs, when they are not being addressed in a traditional setting. Students with English as a second language have similar issues in traditional schooling. The English Teaching Association of Australia noticed that there was a significant language barriers when assessing skills, knowledge and understanding, even when language is not being assessed. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, homeschooling is a quiet rebellion against traditional schooling because it rebels against the set location of and times of schooling and rigid views on cultural teaching. Thank you.
I call upon the second negative speaker, Larissa.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that homeschooling is a quiet rebellion against traditional education. We, the negative team, believe that this statement is undeniably false. The second affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that there are many religious groups who refuse to send their school into traditional education systems. We agree that there may be a few heavily religious families in Australia that lead them to refuse traditional education, but these very few people are of the minority of homeschoolers. At Edith Cowan University found in New South Wales that from the years 2014 to 2022 that only approximately 6% of homeschoolers in New South Wales chose to homeschool for religious reasons. If we're basing our opinions off of minority groups, is it considered a hasty generalisation fallacy for considering the opinion of a minority to be that of a whole is wrong on so many different levels? Should 6% of homeschoolers be all we're considering when defining a whole? Our first speaker, Seth, has already stated that homeschooling is not at all an attempt to overthrow the government, meaning that it cannot be considered a rebellion, as well as how homeschooling simply being a change in how education works, not an uprising against schools. Today, I'll be talking to you about 2 points. My first being is that homeschooling is not at all a rebellion against traditional education, but rather an element that has always been part of the education system. Just as the government has many branches that specialise in different areas, education also takes many different forms. There are standard classes, specialised programs to assist or extend students, and homeschooling, a format often misunderstood. All fall under the umbrella of education, yet homeschooling is unfairly shunned in this debate, as if it defies the rest. As Christiana Homeschool, an online site for homeschooling parents, explains, while many think that homeschooling is the new kid on the block, that simply isn't true. The public education is the new kid. This is supported by the National Home Education Institute stating that before the establishment of formal schools, home education was the norm, with parents bearing the primary responsibility for teaching their children. Over time, traditional education has become the dominant form of teaching, and people have forgotten what once was. Homeschooling is not a rebellion, but a resurfacing of humanity's oldest way of learning, a long-standing branch of education returning after centuries of neglect. Now to my second point. Homeschooling isn't a critique of classroom learning, it's a personalised education choice. As Dr. Rebecca English from QUT's Real Focus Outreach Program notes, the complex reasons families homeschool reflect a range of intersecting needs, including school trauma and school refusal. One other such need is geographical location. For some living in arid areas, the journey to a physical school is far too extensive, so they're homeschooled to ease the pressure of travelling. For myself, I live almost an hour away from my school, and for a long time my parents considered homeschooling me. And in this reality, I'm not alone. ABC News, in a 2025 report, finds that a ginormous number of just over 6,000 kids living in rural Western Australia, out of the 6,466 total that choose to homeschool due to their location. Clearly, guardians choose to homeschool, not out of rebellion, but from legitimate concerns about logistics. There are many other conditions where students may benefit more from homeschooling than traditional education. For example, disabilities or mental health issues can lead parents to see homeschooling as the better option. A 2022 report from the Queensland Government Department of Education found that 61% of homeschooled children in Queensland had either a disability, physical or mental health complexity. Of these, 96% of parents cited better supporting their children's needs as the reason. Nowhere in the 61-page report is rebellion against the system even mentioned. Parents choosing an assistance program or student counselling are both slightly different from the norm, yet no one bats an eye at these levels of assistance. In the same logic, homeschooling is not defiance, but simply parents providing their children's needs. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we, the negative team, see homeschooling in no way to be an uprising against traditional education, but rather one of education's many subcategories that has a strong capability of moulding to a vast range of different needs. Thank you.
I call upon the third affirmative speaker, Logan.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that homeschooling is a quiet rebellion against traditional education. We the affirmative team believe that this statement is undoubtedly true. The first negative speaker has tried to tell you that homeschooling is not trying to overthrow traditional education, thus it cannot be considered a rebellion. This is wrong because although it is not trying to dethrone traditional schooling, it can still be considered a rebellion. This is because the definition of a rebellion is changing the normal of the accepted way of doing something. Homeschooling is exactly that, as families take students out of normal classrooms and routines to retake power over the schools. The second affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that homeschooling is out of necessity due to the family having a barrier to learning student or having trouble with location. This is wrong because although a student may need some help when it comes to learning, traditional schools still provide many options to help these children thrive in this environment. For example, families can be provided with a personal plan for learning, PPL, which gives opportunities for these students to co-construct what they need help to learn and how teachers can facilitate it. This option aligns with the requirements of the Disability Discrimination Act of 1992, as well as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UNESCO, 1948. This means these opportunities should be provided at all schools, as well as an inclusive education team and facilities such as Disability SA coming in to help the student develop their learning. This means that parents who homeschool are a part of a quiet rebellion, as there are many other opportunities for their child to learn in a traditional education system. When she talks about the location, rural schools will often open small schools that are designed to accommodate for a small number of students. For example, Tantanoola High School in SA have just 6 kids enrolled. Also, these rural schools also provide school buses for students, taking ease off parents having to drive all that way for them. This shows a rebellion as parents are changing the norms of driving / taking the bus to school each day. Besides, less than 5% of homeschoolers choose to homeschool because of location, according to news.com. So they are rebelling against other things and not homeschooling out of being too far away from a school. The second negative speaker has also tried to tell you that homeschooling can work alongside traditional education. Although this may be true, it doesn't prove that it isn't a rebellion, as traditional education is now considered the norm, and thus parents are changing this norm of traditional education. Our first speaker spoke to you about how homeschooling does not require standardised testing, such as NAPLAN, which means parents take the stress off their children. He also said that parents rebel against the cost of traditional education by taking back control on where their money is spent on their learning. Our second speaker spoke to you about that parents are rebelling about where and what time school is. This means the norm changes due to flexibility it provides. He also stated that parents who homeschool are rebelling because they are only teaching their way of living and not teaching other cultures. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, the whole point of this topic is to discuss what the intent behind homeschooling is. After everything that my team and I have discussed, you can clearly see that the intent is rebellious. From taking back power from schools to changing the norms, that seems a lot like a rebellion to me. Thank you.
call upon the third negative speaker, Kasali.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for this debate is that homeschooling is a quiet rebellion against traditional education. We, the negative team, believe that this statement is undoubtedly false. The first affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that homeschooling allows parents to take control over what is taught and how. While homeschooling in Australia does allow for a certain level of personalisation, it still comes with strict legal requirements. Parents must register with their state or territory education authority, submit a learning plan that aligns with Australian curriculum, and undergo regular reviews to ensure standards are being met. For example, the New South Wales Education Standards Authorities requires parents to provide a documented program of learning and keep evidence of their child's progress, which is then assessed during inspections. The second affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that there are many religious groups who refuse to send their children into traditional education systems. We agree that there may be a few heavily religious families in Australia that may lead them to refuse traditional education, but these very few people are of the minority of homeschoolers. The Edith Cowan University, found in New South Wales, found from the years 2014 to 2022 that only approximately 6% of homeschoolers in New South Wales choose to homeschool for religious reasons. If we're basing our opinions of minority groups, it is considered a hasty generalisation fallacy for considering the option of a minority to be that of a whole. Should 6% of homeschoolers be all we're considering when we define a whole? The third affirmative speaker has tried to rebut our case by saying that homeschooling is an act of rejecting standard regulations, furthermore making it a rebellion. Homeschooling in Australia cannot realistically be seen as a rebellion against standard regulations because it is fully governed by state and territory laws. Parents are legally required to register, provide a curriculum plan, and prove that their child is meeting educational standards. For example, the Victorian Registration and Qualification Authority explains that families must submit a learning plan covering all key eight learning areas and can be audited to ensure compliance. This makes homeschooling a regulated choice, not an act of defiance. Our first speaker spoke to you about how homeschooling is not an attempt to overthrow traditional education and the many regulations that frame homeschooling. He also explained how constant changes can be seen in education. Homeschooling is an evolution of traditional education rather than a rebellion. Our second speaker has spoken to you about how the homeschooling has always been an element of the educational system. She also stated that homeschooling is a choice made from parents. It is essential to see that homeschooling is not a rebellion against traditional education, but the outcome of people prioritising their own, more personal requirements. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we, the negative team, undoubtedly believe that homeschooling is not a quiet rebellion against traditional education. Homeschooling has many regulations in place and is a personalised choice made by family. Homeschooling is a part of the rich tapestry of Australian education and that is changing and evolving for students' benefits. Now, dear audience, we wish to state once again, we, the negative team, unquestionably believe that homeschooling is not rebellion against traditional education. Thank you.